All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, new blogger. All our viewers on Facebook as well as YouTube, and those of us joining via Zoom. Thank you, Luibla. Give him time, Luibla Lokam, joining me on a round of discussion about PNG's foreign policy. Our topic for today is foreign policy at independence. Mr. Ako will go through and then share with you people what he has discovered after reading and from his experience and from what he knows. And this lecture and all the other lectures after that and the ones before and those that we've staged in previous years, they are part of the unit PG428, Foreign Policy in PNG, and it's part of the program Bachelor of Arts in PNG and International Studies. And Mr. Ako, our sessional lecturer, is based in Port Moresby, and the rest of us, we are based here in Madang. For those who don't know, Divine Red University is in Madang, the main campus, and Mr. Ako is in Port Moresby. So we are communicating with him, sharing knowledge using this particular electronic platform, Zoom, and we're also live streaming on Facebook, and we'll be sharing the recorded video on his YouTube channel. So without further delay, I call upon Mr. Ako to give us his lecture for today. Please, Mr. Ako, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Good afternoon through. I start sharing the screen. Got it on the first try. Okay, as you can see, our topic for today is foreign policy and independence. Let's recap a bit. We will attempt to assess the situation and circumstances leading up to 16 September 1975 and why and how our fathers, in their attempts to ensure that the newly independent state of Papua New Guinea started off on the correct footing, opted to be friends to all, enemies to none. As we know, for the layman, foreign policy is a national government's combined strategies or general objectives to effectively manage its international relations with other countries, either bilaterally or multilaterally. It also affects domestic policies due to the intricacies of globalization. Its main objective, the foreign policy's main objective is to use diplomacy, meaning talking, meeting, negotiating, and making agreements to solve international problems and to keep those problems from developing into conflicts that may require military settlements. In many countries today, this role is usually the primary responsibility of the prime minister or the president. Foreign policy makes the unaware tremble, thinking that anything to do with it remains in the domain of the suave, smartly dressed, internationally savvy foreign service officer, or those with the title of ambassador or high commissioner, whose prime task on earth is to travel the world for seemingly unknown high-level reasons. I have simplified this definition because I view the term foreign policy as a mere fancy word for a game plan, as I mentioned earlier on. It is not a one-size-fits-all game plan, no, which is why bigger global players such as the US have foreign policies on world issues. For example, the US foreign policy in Europe is driven through the NATO, or the US foreign policy on COVID-19 will be by targeting areas where it sees the greatest risk and engaging through multilateral approaches. This source is from Tillerson, taken on 14 June 2020. So this implies a multifaceted approach to the country's overall game plan on how you may want to play in the global arena. be it bilaterally, which will mean knowing the strengths and weaknesses of the other country, or multilaterally, where you have to engage with more than 3 economies at the same time within the same rules while bringing in your own domestic resources into the fray. So this is where smart economies synergize all opportunities to advance their national interests further. Now, you can see the game plan in my analogy of the use of the PNG, use of rugby league as an example. Now, imagine you are the chairman of the PNG Rugby League, planning PNG's participation at the Rugby League World Cup this year. You've been planning these activities since the last World Cup 5 years ago. So what are your strategies to advance PNG's interest in this tournament? Putting PNG on the world map of rugby league, how? Winning the pool matches, how? Exposing and promoting local players for overseas contracts, how? You see, so once you have answered all these questions, you are now in a good and better position to plan your participation in this tournament, or in a globalized sense, play in the international arena bilaterally or multilaterally. Note that first up, you will require commissioning or formal approval to go out and play. Then the planning commences. So this will include, among others, your organizational structure, including governance and management structures, training, generalized and tailored to meet the challenges posed by opponents, either collectively or individually, planning and the resources required, and finally, selecting a suitably qualified team, leaders, players to implement this game plan. For instance, is your foreign service suitably equipped to advance your game plan internationally? So with this scenario now playing around in your minds, let's go back to 1975 and PNG's French dual enemy to run game plan. Planning. See, General Eisenhower, who became the US president, the 34th US president from 1953 to 1961, he was a general, and this is what he says about plans. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. He said this of his experience as the supreme commander of the Allied expeditionary forces in Europe during World War II, which taught him that. So the picture out there, this is the APEC 2018 policy team in action in 2017, drafting the APEC 2018 theme and 3 policy priorities. See, these draft ideas had been workshopped by the Committee on APEC Policy Issue between 2014 and 2017, so 4 years in the making. So from the strategic plan, the 139 documents which the committees, departments, and agencies wrote made up the working papers of the 40-something APEC committees and subcommittees in 2018. So from the interactions in 2018, the APEC 2018 Leaders Chair's Eracon statement was endorsed by leaders at APEC House on Sunday, 18 November 2018. And from this leader statement in 2018, the PNG Foreign Policy on APEC was drafted and endorsed by Cabinet in February 2020 in its decision 36/2020, together with its driver, the roadmap to implement the domestication of the Chair's Eracon statement. So any development cooperation initiative secured through the APEC process through this committee will be to be facilitated by this roadmap. So the biggest question we have now is why friends to all, enemies to none? You see, PNG at birth became an unknown player whose foreign policy evolved as a direct result of Asia's rapid industrialization after the end of the Pacific War. This industrialization created new and powerful interactions between East Asia and North America, which in turn demanded the creation of a new framework for the relationship, first between the US and Japan, and gradually between America and the whole region, and prominently now China. The debate about what form and functions this new relationship would assume was painstaking because the effects of growing regional economic interdependence on the East Asian political climate was still uncertain. So 3 factors conspired to shape the formation of this new relationship. Okay. The first was the Asia-Pacific's political, cultural, and institutional diversity. This led in conjunction with the burden of imperial history, including Japan's World War II occupation and aggression in East Asia, to a certain level of caution among developing nations who still remember the Pacific War and their colonial history, which limited broad and deep interactions among the governments and community leaders. Second, the Asia-Pacific region included economies at many stages of development, many of whom were newly committed to the process of reform and integration into the international community. Most remained cautious as to what such or any arrangement for that matter entailed for them. And lastly, and perhaps the most saliently, the US, a global power with global engagement, was initially not interested in this idea of integration. This meant that regional goals and policy priorities had to be patiently synergized with great deals of innovation. So in the region, reconstruction and reparation commenced immediately after the Pacific War at various spaces. So by 1960, most of the East Asian countries were by now governing themselves and in the process securing their borders, both politically and economically, while looking beyond them to promote trade and open regionalism. The formation of ASEAN in 1967, spearheaded by Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, was a result of this. So while the undercurrent of open regionalism was being played out in our immediate region, PNG during this period, right up to 16 September 1975, was still restricted to living under the yoke of Australia's colonialism. At the end of the war, the colonial administration had moved quickly to re-establish itself and started extending into more remote areas. Pre-war copra, cocoa, and rubber plantations were at least partly rehabilitated, and new plantations, largely in the hands of individual Australian settlers, were established. Settler plantations on leased land were seen in part as a means of stimulating Papua New Guinea smallholder cash cropping. So by the mid-1960s, smallholder production of coffee exceeded plantation outputs. So government expenditures on education, health, and physical infrastructure were markedly expanded, while cooperatives and local government councils were established, and early steps were taken to identify and assist entrepreneurs. Papua New Guinea's economy, or what was the making of it, was still inward looking, and to the outside world, outside eye, non-existence. Okay, so game plan independence. So these collective advancements in support of the winds of open regionalism in the Asia-Pacific region were therefore not felt in our corner. You see, after World War II, the territory of Papua New Guinea was established under the Papua New Guinea Act 1949. This act formally approved the placing of New Guinea under the international trustee system and confirmed the administrative union of New Guinea and Papua under that title. So when the UN's first mission visited in 1950 to review Australia's performance of its mandate in New Guinea, it called for the increased participation by Papua New Guineans in the economy and in politics too. So after this, a team from the ANU recommended the development of smallholder agriculture, the establishment of good road system, and fiscal reform. You can see this in the reports provided by Spade, Belshaw, and Swan, 1953. However, there continued a lack of forward planning for economic prosperity of the territory, as discovered by another UN mission in 1962. Partly in response to this criticism, the Australian government invited the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, or IBRD, to carry out an economic survey of its territory. This was done in 1964, and the subsequent report, IBRD 1965, became a major focus for debate about the territory's economic future. So in essence, the report supported a development strategy based on maximizing the growth of areas of greatest export and agriculture potential to the provision of infrastructure, credit and expansion, and the encouragement of foreign private capital, which largely reflected Australia's standards to be geared to local conditions. Little was said about mining or the possibility of industrialization. This was despite the fact that the construction of what was to be one of the world's largest gold and copper mines, the Pangoma mine, in the 1960s was already in motion and promised to give this territory a degree of economic security substantially greater than was implicit independence on agriculture exports. Sadly, industrialization was not an option, it would seem. These are the background that deals to making up a game plan. Okay. So while the economies of the Asia Pacific plotted open regionalism and trade throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s, our fathers concentrated all efforts on betting of their new nation. The Faber report, which came out of the visits, predominantly recommended the increased indigenization of many forms of economic activities, as well as indigenous control of the economy. It resonated the predominant nationalist economic discourse of PNG in the 1970s and was further endorsed in late 1972 by the Somare government's 8-point improvement plan. The plan did not include international trade. So these 8 themes were subsequently incorporated into the 5 national goals and directive principles of the Constitution of Papua New Guinea in 1975. The aims could be quoted in support of any proposal. However, the opportunities they provided for regional and international trade remained debatable then, since issues such as localization, equitable and regionally balanced development, and priority to rural development were deemed able to run in parallel to opportunities that were available in international trade. Simply, our fathers were concentrating all their efforts in the fight for self-government and eventual political independence from Australia. As such, international trade undertakings were put on the back burner, as it would seem, to the naked eye. So Michael Faber from the Overseas Development Group, University of East Anglia, was contracted by the IBRD to prepare a report on development strategy for PNG over the next 5 years. So this is the person who came up with the Faber report. So when 16 September 1975 arrived, the main idea of a game plan was based on friends to all, enemy to none. So all these undertakings were eventually achieved on 16 September 1975. And once that was achieved, PNG then made its first infant steps into the highly charged world of international relations and diplomacy. As a means of these intentions, it decided to opt for the universal approach of friends to all, enemy to none. While the rest of the countries around the Asia Pacific region were already discussing regional trade initiatives and prosperity. The move in this direction was done purposely to flexibly introduce the newly independent state to the rest of the world by our fathers, without the prejudices of the Cold War era and its geopolitical military alliances and configurations. This is according to Ambassador Max Rai in 2003. You see, it was perceived at that time that such an approach would distance PNG from the prejudices of its colonial power, especially Australia, who was firmly entrenched in a military alliance with the US and other Western European countries against the former Soviet Union and its allies. So open regionalism, including international trade, in the true sense of the word was still an unknown terminology in Papua New Guinea then. However, this being so, the Cold War rivalry and the situation provided PNG the ample opportunity to advance this foreign policy undertaken by formalizing diplomatic relations with a record 60 countries. Ambassador Rai continues that the formal links were also established with numerous international organizations where it felt its national interests would be best served. The late Grand Chief Prime Minister Michael Somare then appeared before the United Nations General Assembly on 10th October 1975 to deliver his first address to the UN. Soon after, PNG was admitted as the UN's 142nd member. He also became the first foreign leader to meet Mr. Hua Guofeng, the successor of Chairman Mao Zedong, in October 1976, and consequently formalized relations with the People's Republic of China through the signing of the joint communique on 12 October 1976 thereby committing PNG to the One China policy. So during the same period, Papua New Guinea's first foreign minister, Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki, also made extensive tours to the capital cities of numerous countries and the headquarters of international organizations, accompanied by the first foreign secretary, Sir Anthony Siago, to formalize relations with these countries and organizations. What the fathers were expounding throughout the world was in actual fact open regionalism in a sense of the universalism mantra. It was as if they were plotting and setting the scene before PNG could venture into the maze of international trade. So when you look at the French soil enemy to none, in conclusion, making friends throughout the world, bilaterally and multilaterally, then looking at trading opportunities, consolidating our human capital and natural resources to support this foreign policy. History tells us that by 1980, under Prime Minister Chen, selective and active engagement would be PNG's new foreign policy, taking over from the very liberal outlook. So in hindsight, when we look at, did we achieve much between 1975 and 1980? Did we have an adequately trained, selected side to take on all those new friendships and win? Or was it just to safeguard a newborn infant as it attempted to walk? I'll stop there, Mr. Yagiura. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So this was how, this is my outlook on foreign policy and independence. And we have time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hako. I was thinking we move the question period to the next session, but
Okay,
we can go ahead and ask questions.
continue.
I'll open the floor for questions now. If any of you, those of you online on Facebook or even here in the Zoom meeting room, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Hako? I made a comment in the chat. I said French to all, enemy to none is no longer our foreign policy. If you read the media or if you listen to our politicians nowadays or at this point in time, many of them are still confused. Some, they say that it's still our foreign policy, but if you go back and look at it, look at our foreign policy history, it changed during the creation of the white paper in 1980 when Sir Julius Chen came into power, and they implemented the foreign policy of active and selective engagement. That's when they stopped universalism, but we adopted it as our foreign policy principle. So as a third world nation, we needed this principle to really define the way we behave in the international stage, because the world was divided by ideological divides, the Cold War, and now you have the superpower rivalry between China and the US. So this principle of friends to all, enemies to none, no can friend mo laman, imi friend mo gramano. This principle is now like a principle that we are applying to define our behavior as a state. So we're not only going to bed with China and eating from China's plate, but we also meeting with the US and with Japan, Indonesia, Australia. So we have big friends to everyone and no one is our enemy. So you'll see that this particular, it started off as a foreign policy in 1975, and then over the years, it has more or less become a foreign policy principle. So if you study the Chinese foreign policy, you'll see that, or if you study Chinese foreign policy, you'll see that they have the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which is derived from the teachings of Confucius and from the teachings of Taoism, from their own cultural teachings. And it's about non-interference in the internal affairs of another state and peacefully coexisting with another opposite entity and all that, the yin and the yang. So it has, like, over the years, defined the way they've conducted their diplomatic relations or their foreign policy. So for us, we've not derived any principle from our own culture, but we've adopted the friends to all, enemies to none principle as a key principle that has defined our foreign policy since 1975. So that's just my observation, a comment that I want to add on to what Mr. Ako shared with us.
We can move forward to the next Q&A session.
Okay, sure, that will be good. Okay, so we'll meet you all in the next session, and we also thank our viewers on Facebook, on YouTube, and advise you that we will now start the second meeting because of the public holiday on Tuesday. Our timetable is a bit messy, our schedule is messy, so we've decided to squeeze 2 meetings in 2 hours. So this is the first meeting, and I want to thank all of you for your attendance and for your attention. And if you do have any questions, you can ask in the next session. Thank you, Mr. Ako, once again for your time.